Devils can be driven out of the heart by the touch of a hand on a hand or a mouth. Tennessee Williams. When I lead seminars, I always set off scenes of raucous, joyous, chaotic frenzy. If you walked in the door at the right moment, you would come upon perhaps 300 people jumping up and down, screeching and hollering, roaring like lions, waving their arms, shaking their fists like Rocky, clapping their hands, puffing up their chests, strutting like peacocks, giving the thumbs up sign, and otherwise acting as if they had so much personal power they could light up a city if they wanted to. What the heck is going on? What's going on is the other half of the cybernetic loop, physiology. That bedlam is about one thing, acting as if you felt more resourceful, more powerful, happier than you ever felt before, acting as if you knew you were going to succeed. Acting as if you were totally energized as well. One way to get yourself into a state that supports your achieving any outcome is to act as if you were already there. Acting as if is most effective when you put your physiology in the state you'd be in if you were already effective. Physiology is the most powerful tool we have for instantly changing states, for instantly producing dynamic results. There's an old saying, if you would be powerful, pretend to be powerful. Truer words were never spoken. I expect people to get powerful results from my seminars, results that will change their lives. To do that, they have to be in the most resourceful physiology possible, for there's no powerful action without powerful physiology. If you adopt a vital, dynamic, excited physiology, you automatically adopt the same kind of state. The biggest leverage we have in any situation is physiology, because it works so fast, and it works without fail. Physiology and internal representations are totally linked. If you change one, you instantly change the other. I like to say, there is no mind, there is only body, and there is no body, there is only mind. If you change your physiology, that is, your posture, your breathing patterns, your muscle tension, your tonality, you instantly change your internal representations and your state. Can you ever remember a time when you felt totally run down? How did you perceive the world? When you feel physically tired or your muscles are weak or you have pain somewhere, you perceive the world quite differently from when you feel rested, alive, and vital. Physiological manipulation is a powerful tool for controlling your own brain. So it's extremely important that we realize how strongly it affects us, that it's not some extraneous variable, but an absolutely crucial part of a cybernetic loop that's always in action. When your physiology runs down, the positive energy of your state runs down. When your physiology brightens and intensifies, your state does the same thing. So physiology is the lever to emotional change. In fact, you can't have an emotion without a corresponding change in physiology. And you can't have a change in physiology without a corresponding change in state. There are two ways to change state, by changing internal representations or by changing physiology. So if you want to change your state in an instant, what do? Zap, you change your physiology, that is, your breathing, your posture, your facial expression, the quality of your movement, and so on. If you start to grow tired, there are certain specific things you can do with your physiology to continue to communicate this to yourself. A slump in shoulder position, relaxation of many major muscle groups, and the like. You can become tired simply by changing your internal representations so that they give your nervous system a message that you are tired. If you change your physiology to the way it is when you feel strong, it will change your internal representations and how you feel at that moment. If you keep telling yourself that you're tired, you're forming the internal representation that keeps you tired. If you say you have the resources to be alert and on top of things, if you consciously adopt that physiology, your body will make it so. Change your physiology and you change your state. In the chapter on belief, I showed you a little about the effects that belief have on health. Everything that scientists are finding today emphasizes one thing: sickness and health, vitality and depression are often decisions. They're things we can decide to do with our physiology. They're usually not conscious decisions, but they're decisions nonetheless. No one consciously says, I'd rather be depressed than happy. But what do depressed people do? We think of depression as a mental state, but it has a very clear, identifiable physiology. It's not hard to visualize a person who is depressed. Depressed people often walk around with their eyes down. They're accessing in a kinesthetic mode and are talking to themselves about all the things that make them feel depressed. They drop their shoulders. They take weak, shallow breaths. They do all the things that put their body in a depressed physiology. Are they deciding to be depressed? They sure are. Depression is a result, and it requires very specific body images to create it. Even Charlie Brown understands this. The exciting thing is that you can just as easily create the result called ecstasy by changing your physiology in certain specific ways. After all, what are emotions? They're a complex association, a complex configuration of physiological states. Without changing any of his internal representations, I can change the state of any depressed person in seconds. You don't have to look and see what pictures a depressed person is making in his mind. Just change his physiology, and zap, you change his state. If you stand up straight, if you throw your shoulders back, if you breathe deeply from your chest, if you look upward, if you put yourself in a resourceful physiology, you can't be depressed. Try it yourself. Stand up tall, throw your shoulders back, breathe deeply, look up, move your body. See if you can feel depressed in that posture. You'll find that it's almost impossible. Instead, your brain is getting a message from your physiology to be alert and vital and resourceful. And that's what it becomes. When people come to me and say they can't do something, I say, act as if you could do it. They usually reply, well, I don't know how. So I say, act as if you did know how. Stand the way you would be standing if you did know how to do it. Breathe the way you'd be breathing if you did know how to do it right now. Make your face look as if you could do it right now. As soon as they stand that way, breathe that way, and put their physiology in that state, they instantly feel they can do it. It works without fail because of the amazing leverage of being able to adapt and change physiology. Over and over again, simply by changing physiology, you can make people do things they could never do before, because the second they change their physiology, they change their state. Think of something you imagine you can't do but would like to be able to do. Now how would you stand if you knew you could do it? How would you talk? How would you breathe? Right now, put yourself as congruently as possible in the physiology you would be in if you knew you could do it. Make your whole body give you the same message. Make your stance, breathing, and face reflect the physiology you'd have if you knew you could do it. Now note the difference between this state and the one you were in. If you are congruently maintaining the right physiology, you will feel as if you can handle what you didn't think you could before. The same thing happens in the firewalk. When some people face the bed of coals, they're in a state of total confidence and readiness because of the combination of their internal representations and physiology. Therefore, they can stride confidently and healthfully across the hot coals. Some people, however, begin to panic at the last moment. They may have changed their internal representations of what is going to happen, so they now imagine the worst possible scenario. Or the searing heat may take them out of their confident state as they approach the edge of the bed of coals. As a result, their bodies may be shaking with fear, or they may be crying, or they may freeze up, all their muscles locked, or they may have any number of other major physiological reactions. To help them break through their fear in a moment and take action in spite of seemingly impossible odds, I need to do only one thing: change their state. Remember, all human behavior is the result of the state we're in. When we feel strong and resourceful, we will attempt things we never would if we felt scared, weak, and tired. So the firewalk doesn't just teach people intellectually, it gives them an experience of changing their state and behavior in a moment to support their goals, regardless of what they had thought or felt previously. What do I do with a shaking, crying, frozen person shrieking at the edge of the bed of coals? One thing I can do is change his internal representations. I can have him think of how he will feel after having walked successfully and healthfully to the other side of the coals. This causes him to create an internal representation that changes his physiology. In a matter of 2 to 4 seconds, the person is in a resourceful state. You can see him change his breathing and facial expression. I then tell him to go, and the same person who was paralyzed with fear a split second earlier now walks purposefully over the coals and celebrates on the other side. But sometimes people have clear internal pictures of burning or tripping that are bigger than their representations of being able to walk successfully and healthfully. So I need to have them change their submodalities, and this can take time. My other choice, one that's more efficient when someone is totally panicked in front of the coals, is to change his physiology. After all, if he changes his internal representations, the nervous system has to signal the body to change its posture, breathing pattern, muscular tension, and so forth. So why not just go to the source, bypass all other communication, and change the physiology directly? So I take this crying person and have him look up. By doing this, he begins to access the visual aspects of his neurology instead of his kinesthetic. Almost immediately, he stops crying. Try this for yourself. If you are upset or crying and want to stop, look up. Put your shoulders back and get into a visual state. Your feelings will change almost instantaneously. You can do this for your kids. When they get hurt, have them look up. The crying and pain will be stopped, or at least decreased tremendously, in a moment. I may then have the person stand the way he would if he were totally confident and knew he could walk successfully and healthfully across the coals, breathe the way he would be breathing, and say something in the tone of voice of someone who is totally confident. In this way, his brain gets a new message about how to feel, and in the resulting state the same person who was totally immobilized with fear a few seconds ago can produce the action that supports his goals. The same technique can be practiced whenever we feel we can't do something, we can't approach that woman or man, we can't talk to the boss, and so on. We can change our states and empower ourselves to take action either by changing the pictures and dialogues in our minds or by changing how we are standing, how we are breathing, and the tone of voice we are using. The ideal is to change both physiology and tone. Having done this, we can immediately feel resourceful and be able to follow through with the actions necessary to produce the results we desire. The same is true with exercise. If you work out hard and you're short of breath and you keep saying to yourself how tired you are or how far you've run, you will indulge in a physiology, like sitting down or panting, that supports that communication. If, however, even though you're out of breath, you consciously stand upright and direct your breathing into a normal rate, you will feel recovered in a matter of moments. In addition to how we change our feelings, and thus our actions, by changing our internal representations and physiology, the biochemical and electrical processes of our bodies are also affected. Studies show that when people get depressed, their immune systems follow suit and become less efficient, their white blood cell count drops. Have you ever seen a Kirlian photograph of a person? It's the representation of the body's bioelectrical energy, and it changes remarkably as a person changes his state or mood. Because of the linking of mind and body, in intense states our whole electrical field can change, and we can do things that wouldn't otherwise seem possible. Everything I've experienced and read tells me that our bodies have far fewer limits, both positive and negative, than we have been led to believe. Dr. Herbert Benson, who has written extensively about mind-body relationships, recounts some astonishing stories of the power of voodoo in different parts of the world. In one Australian Aboriginal tribe, witch doctors practice a custom called pointing the bone. It consists of casting a magic spell so potent that the victim knows with absolute certainty he will undergo some terrible disease and probable death. This is how Dr. Benson described one such occurrence in 1925. The man who discovers that he is being boned by an enemy is, indeed, a pitiable sight. He stands aghast, with his eyes staring at the treacherous pointer, and his hands lifted as though to ward off the lethal medium which he imagines as pouring into his body. His cheeks blanch and his eyes become glassy, and the expression of his face becomes horribly distorted. He attempts to shriek, but usually the sound chokes in his throat, and all that one might see is froth at his mouth. His body begins to tremble and his muscles twist involuntarily. He sways backwards and falls to the ground, and after a short time appears to be in a swoon, but soon after he writhes as if in mortal agony, and covering his face with his hands, begins to moan. His death is only a matter of a comparatively short time. I don't know about you, but that's one of the most vivid and horrifying descriptions that I've ever read. I don't think I'll ask you to model it. But it's also one of the most telling examples imaginable of the power of physiology and of belief. In conventional terms, nothing was being done to that man, nothing at all. But the power of his own belief and the force of his own physiology created a terrifyingly potent negative force that utterly destroyed him. Is that sort of experience limited to societies we consider primitive? Of course not. Exactly the same process goes on around us every day. Benson mentions that Dr. George L. Engel of the University of Rochester Medical Center has developed a lengthy file of newspaper items from all over the world concerning sudden deaths under unexpected circumstances. In each case, it was not that something awful happened in the outside world. Rather, the culprit was the victim's own negative internal representations. In each case, something made the victim feel powerless, helpless, and alone. The result was virtually the same as in the Aboriginal rite. What's interesting to me is that there seems to have been more research and more anecdotal emphasis on the harmful side of the mind-body relationship than on the helpful side. We always hear about the horrible effects of stress or about people losing the will to live after the death of a loved one. We all seem to know that negative states and emotions can literally kill us. But we hear less about the ways positive states can heal us. One of the most famous stories on that side of the ledger is that of Norman Cousins. In his Anatomy of an Illness, he described how he made a miraculous recovery from a long, debilitating illness by laughing his way to health. Laughter was one tool Cousins used in a conscious effort to mobilize his will to live and to prosper. A major part of his regimen was spending a good deal of his day immersed in films, television programs, and books that made him laugh. This obviously changed the consistent internal representations he was making, and the laughter radically changed his physiology and thus the messages to his nervous system of how to respond. He found that immediate, positive physical changes ensued. He slept better, his pain was lessened, his entire physical presence improved. Eventually, he recovered completely, even though one of his doctors initially said he had a 1 in 500 chance of making a full recovery. Cousins concluded, "I have learned never to underestimate the capacity of the human mind and body to regenerate even when prospects seem most wretched. The life force may be the least understood force on earth." Some fascinating research that is beginning to surface may shed some light on Cousins's experience and others like it. The studies look at the way our facial expressions affect the way we feel and conclude it's not so much that we smile when we feel good or laugh when we are in good spirits. Rather, smiling and laughing set off biological processes that, in fact, make us feel good. They increase the flow of blood to the brain and change the level of oxygen, the level of stimulation of the neurotransmitters. The same thing happens with other expressions. Put your facial expression in the physiology of fear or anger or disgust or surprise, and that's what you'll feel. Our bodies are our gardens, our wills are gardeners. William Shakespeare. There are about 80 muscles in the face, and they act as tourniquets, either to keep the blood supply steady while the body is experiencing wild swings or to alter the brain's blood supply and thus, to some degree, the brain's functioning. In a remarkable paper written in 1907, a French physician named Israel Weinbaum theorized that facial expressions actually change feelings. Other researchers today are finding the same thing. As Dr. Paul Ekman, professor of psychiatry at the University of California in San Francisco, told the Los Angeles Times, June 5, 1985, "We know that if you have an emotion, it shows on your face. Now we've seen it goes the other way too. You become what you put on your face. ... If you laugh at suffering, you don't feel suffering inside. If your face shows sorrow, you do feel it inside." In fact, Ekman says, the same principle is used regularly to beat lie detectors. People who put themselves in a physiology of belief, even when they're lying through their teeth, will register belief. All this is exactly what I and others in the NLP community have been teaching for years. Now, it looks as though the scientific community is finally verifying what we already found useful. There are a lot of other things in this book they'll be validating in upcoming years. But you don't have to wait for an academic researcher to confirm it for you. You can use it right away and produce the results you desire now. We're learning so much now about mind-body correlations that some people teach that all you really have to do is take good care of your body. If your body is working at peak levels, your brain will work more effectively as well. The better you use your body, the better your brain is going to work. That's the essence of the work of Moshe Feldenkrais. He used movement to teach people how to think and how to live. Feldenkrais found that simply by working on a kinesthetic level, you can change your self-image, your state, and the overall functioning of your brain. In fact, he states that the quality of your life is the quality of your movement. His works are an invaluable source for creating human transformation through changing physiology in a very specific way. An important corollary of physiology is congruency. If I'm giving you what I think is a positive message, but my voice is weak and tentative and my body language is disjointed and unfocused, I'm incongruent. Incongruity keeps me from being all I can be, from doing all I can do, and from creating my strongest state. Giving oneself contradictory messages is a subliminal way of pulling a punch. You may have experienced times when you didn't believe a person, but you weren't sure why. What the person said made sense, but you somehow came away not really believing him. Your unconscious mind picked up what your conscious mind didn't. For example, when you asked a question, the person may have said, yes, but at the time his head may have been slowly shaking no. Or he may have said, I can handle it, but you noted his shoulders were hunched over, his eyes were down, and his breathing was shallow, all of which told your unconscious that he was really saying, I can't handle it. Part of him wanted to do what you were asking, and part of him didn't. Part of him was confident, and part of him wasn't. Incongruency worked against him. He was trying to go in two directions at once. He was representing one thing with his words and quite another with his physiology. We've all experienced the price of incongruence when part of us really wants something but another part within seems to stop us. Congruence is power. People who consistently succeed are those who can commit all of their resources, mental and physical, to work together toward achieving a task. Stop a moment now and think of the 3 most congruent people you know. Now think of the 3 most incongruent people you know. What is the difference between them? How do congruent people affect you personally versus people who are incongruent? Developing congruity is a major key to personal power. When I'm communicating, I'm emphatic in my words, my voice, my breathing, my entire physiology. When my body and my words match, I'm giving clear signals to my brain that this is what I want to produce. And my mind responds accordingly. If you say to yourself, well, yeah, I guess this is what I ought to be doing, and your physiology is weak and indecisive, what sort of a message does the brain get? It's like trying to view a television with a flickering tube. You can barely make out the picture. The same is true for your brain. If the signals your body provides are weak or conflicting, the brain doesn't have a clear sense of what to do. It's like a soldier going into battle with a general who says, well, maybe we ought to try this. I'm not sure if it will work, but let's go out and see what happens. What kind of a state does that put the soldier in? If you say, I absolutely will do that, and your physiology is unified, that is, your posture, your facial expression, your breathing pattern, the quality of your gestures and movements, and your words and your tonality match, you absolutely will do it. Congruent states are what we all want to move toward, and the biggest step you can take is to be sure you're in a firm, decisive, congruent physiology. If your words and your body don't match up, you're not going to be totally effective. One way to develop congruency is to model the physiologies of people who are congruent. The essence of modeling is to discover which part of the brain an effective person uses in a given situation. If you want to be effective, you want to use your brain in the same way. If you mirror someone's physiology exactly, you will tap the same part of your brain. Are you in a congruent state now? If not, shift into one. What percentage of the time are you in incongruent states? Can you be congruent more often? Start to do so today. Stop and identify 5 people who have powerful physiologies that you would like to mirror. How do these physiologies differ from yours? How do the people sit, stand, move? What are some of their key facial expressions and gestures? Take a moment and sit in the way one of these people sits. Make similar facial expressions and gestures. Notice how you feel. In our seminars, we have people mirror other people's physiologies, and they find they'll access a similar state and get a similar feeling. So I want you to try an exercise. You need to do it with someone else. Have that person recall a specific intense memory and, without telling you about it, go back into that state. Now I want you to mirror that person exactly. Mirror the way he's sitting, how his legs are positioned. Mirror the position of his arms and hands. Mirror the amount of tension you see in his face and body. Mirror the position of the head and any movements you see in his eyes or legs or neck. Mirror his mouth, his skin tension, his rate of breathing. Try to put yourself in the exact same physiology he's in. If you do all this exactly, you succeed. By duplicating that person's physiology, you will be providing your brain with the same signal as he is giving his brain. You'll be able to feel similar or the same feelings. Often you'll see your version of the same pictures he's seeing and think your version of the same thoughts he's thinking. After you've done this, note a couple of words to describe the state you're in, that is, what you feel while you are mirroring the person exactly. Then check with that person to find out what he was feeling. About 80 to 90% of the time, you will have used the same word to describe the state you were in. There are many people in every seminar who actually start seeing what the other person is seeing. They've described exactly where the person was or identified the people he was picturing in his mind. Some of the accuracies defy rational explanation. It's almost like a psychic experience, except there's no psychic training. All we do is deliver to our brains the exact same messages as the person we're mirroring. I know this sounds hard to believe, but people in my seminars have learned that it can be done after 5 minutes of training. I can't guarantee you'll succeed the first time out, but if you ever come close, you'll find yourself in the same state of anger or pain or sadness or elation or joy or ecstasy that the other person is in. Yet you've had no conversation in advance as to what he was feeling. Some recent research gives scientific support to this. According to a story in Omni magazine, 2 researchers have found that words have a characteristic electrical pattern in the brain. Neurophysiologist Donald York of the University of Missouri Medical Center and Chicago speech pathologist Tom Jensen found that the same patterns hold true from person to person. In one experiment, they were even able to find the same brain wave pattern in people who spoke different languages. They've already taught computers to recognize those brain wave patterns so they can interpret the words in a person's mind even before they're spoken. The computers can literally read minds, much the way we can when we precisely mirror physiology. Some unique aspects of physiology, special looks or tonalities or physical gestures can be found in people of great power, like John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., or Franklin Roosevelt. If you can model their specific physiologies, you'll tap into the same resourceful parts of the brain and start to process information the way they do. You'll literally feel the way they felt. Obviously, since breathing, movement, and tonality are critical factors in creating state, photos of these people do not provide as specific an amount of information as would be desirable. A movie or video of them would be ideal. For a moment, mirror just their postures, facial expressions, and gestures as accurately as you can. You will begin to feel similar feelings. If you remember how that person's voice sounds, you might say something in that tone of voice. Also note the level of congruency all these people share. Their physiology is delivering one single message, not conflicting messages. If you were incongruent when you mirrored their physiologies, you would not feel as they felt because you would not be delivering the same messages to the brain. If, for example, you were mirroring the physiology and simultaneously saying to yourself, "I look stupid," you would not fully experience the benefits of mirroring because you were not congruent. Your body would have been saying one thing and your mind another. Power comes from delivering one unified message. If you can get a tape of a Martin Luther King Jr. speech and speak as he speaks, duplicating his tonality, voice, and tempo, you may feel a sense of power and strength like never before. And one of the great advantages of reading a book by someone like John F. Kennedy or Benjamin Franklin or Albert Einstein is that it puts you in a state similar to theirs. You start thinking like the authors, creating the same kind of internal representations. But by duplicating their physiology, you can feel like them in the flesh and even behave as they did. Would you like to immediately tap more of your inner power and magic? Start consciously modeling the physiology of people you respect or admire. You will begin to create the same states that they experience. It is often possible to achieve an exact experience. Obviously, you don't want to model the physiology of someone who is depressed. You want to model people who are in a powerful, resourceful state because duplicating them will give you a new set of choices, a way to access parts of your brain that you may not have effectively used in the past. In one seminar, I met a kid I couldn't figure out. He was in the least resourceful physiology I'd ever seen, and I couldn't get him into a more powerful state. It turns out he'd had part of his brain destroyed in an accident. But I got him to act, as if to model me and put himself into a physiology he didn't think he had access to. And by modeling me, his brain started to work in a whole new way. By the end of the seminar, people almost couldn't recognize him. He was acting and feeling completely different from ever before. By mimicking another's physiology, he had begun to experience new choices of thought, emotion, and action. If you were to model a world-class runner's belief systems, mental syntax, and physiology, does that mean you too would be able to run a mile in less than 4 minutes shortly after modeling him? Of course not. You are not modeling the person exactly, because you have not developed the same consistent messages to your nervous system as he has through consistent practice. It's important to note that some strategies require a level of physiological development or programming that you do not yet have. You may have modeled the world's greatest baker, but if you try to bake his recipe in an oven that only gets up to 225 degrees, while his goes to 625, you are not going to produce the same result. However, by using his recipe, you can maximize the result you get even with your oven. And if you model the way he got his oven to increase its output over the years, you can create the same result if you're willing to pay the appropriate price. In order to increase your ability to produce results by modeling strategies, you may need to invest some time in increasing the power of your oven. This is something we'll talk a bit about in the next chapter. Being attentive to physiology creates choices. Why do people take drugs, drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, overeat? Aren't these all indirect attempts to change state by changing physiology? This chapter has provided you with the direct approach to quickly changing states. By breathing or moving body or facial muscles in a new pattern, you immediately change your state. It will produce the same results as food, alcohol, or drugs without harmful side effects to either your body or your psyche. Remember, in any cybernetic loop, the individual who has the most choice is in control. In any device, the most critical aspect is flexibility. All other things being equal, the system with the most flexibility has more choices and more ability to direct other aspects of the system. It's the same with people. The people with the most choices are the ones most in charge. Modeling is about creating possibility. And there's no faster, more dynamic way than through physiology. The next time you see someone who is extremely successful, someone you admire and respect, copy gestures, feel the difference, and enjoy the change in thought patterns. Play. Experience it. New choices await you. Now let's take a look at another aspect of physiology, the foods we eat, the way we breathe, and the nutrients we supply to ourselves. They all are parts of